Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. Thanks for being with us today. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I'm excited to bring you another amazing story artist who has an interesting approach to leadership storytelling. Now, any legitimate storytelling consultant or coach works from proven story structures. We, of course, train on the 3-word and, but, therefore, or ABT framework to make your messages land right the first time, every time. The ABT builds to the second story structure we teach that are the 5 primal elements of a short story for big impact, to share compelling anecdotes that make your business points for you. These 2 frameworks are used in the 10-step story cycle system to help transform your presentations and long-form communications into messages that transport your audience and move people to action. So today, you will learn another framework called S.O.A.R, S-O-A-R, developed by our guest, Paul Morton, to craft effective leadership narratives. I've been training hundreds of Walmart Canada leaders and their associates about how to use the ABT for more effective internal communications. One of their managers, we'll call him Ernie, asked me how to apply the ABT framework visually in his presentations. Whoa, great question, I responded. Ernie is a leader who deals with a lot of data. He wants to simplify his communication with more engaging visuals, but my answer was, well, Ernie, it kind of depends. It depends on the messaging you're sending in your visual communications. Is it supposed to be funny, serious, surprising, novel, etc.? It depends on what channels you are using. It depends on the makeup of your audience and how they like to receive their information. It just depends, and I know it's not as specific of an answer as you or Ernie are looking for, but it's honest. So this training was about a month ago, and it was later that day after the training that I was considering Ernie's question that I came across the mention of an iconic Lego print campaign on LinkedIn. It uses only visual storytelling without any copy. Gasp, I know, crazy, huh? And a pint-sized logo.
Inconceivable!
That was for you Princess Bride fans. This Lego campaign is made up of a series of 4 print ads. In each one, you see a rudimentary figure or structure built with a Lego, and the shadow it casts is a silhouette of the item the Lego represents. For instance, you see a rudimentary dinosaur casting the shadow of a pterodactyl, or 2 white logos snapped together creating the silhouette of a ship. To me, the brilliance of this visual storytelling campaign can be pieced together using the and, but, therefore narrative template. The ABT uses the 3 forces of story of agreement, contradiction, and consequence. So let me talk you through the 3 forces of story in the Lego airplane ad and why it works. In the print ad, you see the familiar, colorful Legos snapped together in a basic shape of an airplane. We can all agree on that. It's an airplane. But the shadow it casts of an actual airplane reveals a surprise, communicating the imagination at play. The therefore or consequence of this playful visual is the Lego brand. It answers the question posed by the contrasting images. What makes this visual metaphor work? Our primal, pattern-seeking, puzzle-solving, buying limbic brain loves to digest information in this order. Setup, problem, resolution, agreement, contradiction, consequence. Another way of thinking of these forces are plant, pivot, and payoff. You plant the familiar to set the stage for what we all know as the status quo. This is agreement. This is that little Lego figure. Then you make a novel pivot to introduce a relevant competing idea or a contradiction. You want to build as much contrast between plant and pivot as possible to energize your story. The payoff answers the contradiction created by the visual metaphor. This is the consequence of the communication. Stand-up comics follow the same format when writing their jokes. Setup, twist, punchline. It's simply the ubiquitous ABT framework in all of its different forms. The Lego campaign, which you can see in the show notes, is an inspired application of the three forces of story. They work because these forces play beautifully in the theater of your mind, inviting you into the story to solve the puzzle. So the next time you want to bring visual punch to your presentations and long-form communications, first craft your ABT to focus your message or story on a singular problem-solution dynamic. Then consider what kind of image or images you'll use to amplify the impact of your message. Today's guest knows something about amplifying the impact of leadership communications using his S.O.A.R story structure, which is very similar to the ABT. And he demonstrates why it's so important that leaders grasp the golden ring of storytelling to not just guide their people, but inspire them to do their finest work.
The business of leadership is the story that you are telling. It's not, once upon a time, there were three little executives who wanted to eat porridge. No. The story is the journey that you're taking people on from point A to point B that they would not get on their own. They are characters in the story. This is what you're trying to get across to them. And if you can share as part of this story that my job is to make you great, my job is to make you succeed, then your interpretation of my actions shifts. I'm no longer a micromanager trying to tell you what to do. I got some feedback, you've got to do this. I've got an observation that will help you, because that's what I want to do. I want to help.
Paul Morton is the CEO of the Practical Leadership Academy and a seasoned leader in B2B SaaS and corporate learning. Paul tackles a critical issue. Most managers are accidental leaders, promoted for technical skills, not their leadership. This often perpetuates bad practices they've experienced, continuing the cycle. Paul's mission is to break the cycle with a minimum effective dose approach, delivering the biggest impact with the least effort. Through his academy and podcast, he offers practical, no-nonsense strategies rooted in servant leadership, where making others successful is the ultimate goal. If you are looking to elevate your management team skills without pulling them out of the field, Paul's insights are exactly what you need. He's here to help you build a high-performing, effective team that excels in today's fast-paced environment. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Paul Morton. Hey, Paul, welcome to the Business of Story.
Thank you, Park. It's an absolute delight to be here.
Now, it's first thing in the morning here in northern Arizona. What time is it and where are you coming from?
It is 8 minutes past 5 o'clock on our United Kingdom British time-telling matrix. I'm coming from about an hour and a half southwest of London in the United Kingdom, but I'm a Scot, so I'm a transplant.
That's what I was going to say. I see the flags in the background over your shoulder, but it didn't sound like a Brit to me. So you come from, were you born and raised then in Scotland?
Absolutely. Well, I like to say British, but Scottish by birth and by upbringing. And I emigrated in 1999. I came down for a job to London, and I stayed down here for the weather. It's a lot warmer.
Really? I guess it would be, wouldn't it? I always kind of picture, London and the area, everywhere around Britain, a little bit cold and damp. And every time I've been there, it's been kind of cold and damp.
That's fairly accurate. I mean, a Scottish summer is when it hits 60 degrees. That's really a thing.
Well, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so I think it's kind of similar, although with global warming or whatever is happening out there in our climate, it is definitely getting warmer, longer, later up there.
Do you know, I'll take it, frankly. I'll take it.
I know. It's a lot more comfortable, isn't it? Well, I appreciate you being here. Now, you've got this tremendous background in marketing, sales, and leadership development. And Paul, I get all kinds of requests to be on the show from leadership trainers, coaches, people, that are in your line of work. And very few actually make them on because the leadership trainers are a dime a dozen out there. But you really caught my attention because of your approach to servant leadership and storytelling and this S.O.A.R template that we'll get into, S.O.A.R, that you use. But let's do a quick little backstory step and tell us, how do you find yourself doing what you're doing today?
Well, the story, there we are. The situation was that in the middle of COVID, we did a big restructure in the last grown up job I was working for. The obstacle was that we had too many people in too many different places. And so then what we did is we basically fired a whole ton of folk. And I put my hand up and said, after 12 years, it's time for me to go as well. And the result was they handed me a bucket load of money and said, don't let the door hit your backside on the way out. It didn't. And that was 4 years ago. And 4 years after being a very senior revenue leader with a big fancy job title and business class, this, that, and ever, it turns out that you can actually make a living on your own. And the freedom is wonderful. I get to work with dozens, if not hundreds of different people and organizations and do what I do and learn from people every single day of my life. So after 28 years of working in corporates, mostly in learning and development and human resources, selling things to companies, I'm now working for myself.
And what was that company? What industry were you in?
I was working in corporate digital learning. So I was working for a large publishing company at the very end. I started with a tiny startup based in Norway, which was then bought by a mid-sized startup based in Paris, which was then bought by John Wiley and Sons, which was a $3 billion US publishing house. So that was a fairly adventurous step-by-step expansion of experiences.
And have you been in learning and development your entire career in one way, shape, or form?
I've been selling to learning and development ever since I started work, but it actually goes back further than that. My mother's a teacher. So she was a teacher for very many years. We had a conversation once, and we worked out that she had taught somewhere in the region of 5,000 people, which for a lifetime full of event and meaning is pretty good. And I was telling her, as a digital learning person, 5,000 people takes 30 seconds. So the reach, the responsibility that comes with that is something different.
And how did you learn your craft in learning and development? Because I learned when I went to work for ASU, Arizona State University, as an adjunct storytelling professor in a master's program there. I told them, I'd never taught in my life, let alone a master's program. And they said, that's okay. We want you for your experience. Professor of practice, we will bring a curriculum designer or designers in to work with you to pull it together. And they did. And I learned so much in that process on how to teach, especially distance learning virtually. How did you come about your talents?
A lot of pain, a lot of trial, a lot of error. And eventually, through the opportunity I had to work with two magnificent leaders in my term. So my first 15 odd years was being thrown in at the very, very deep end without the first concept of how to paddle a canoe, far less lead a team. And the trail of devastation that I've left behind me in terms of victims of my leadership incompetence is vast. And if you are listening and I know you and you were one of them, I'm so sorry. But I then had the opportunity to work with two superb leaders, one who was deeply compassionate and one who was meticulously organized and rigorous. And those two sides fed nicely into what I needed at exactly the right moment in time. Absolutely blessed. So it's taken a lot of trial, error, and thankfully good mentorship and good coaching.
So take us to a moment, one of those terrible situations you got yourself into as being an unprepared leader.
Well, it was very, very early on, and there was a young man named Marco. I think he was possibly in the very first team I ever had. And I'll use the name Marco because, well, that was his name. And he sent out an email with a link in it that was broke. And I thought, this is an opportunity. This is me as my first leadership experience. This is an opportunity to set an example of the standards that I expect my team to uphold. So I roundly berated the guy in the middle of this open area. There was about 12 guys there. It was like a support, customer service type situation. And I said, Marco, you set this thing out and it didn't work and the customer's unhappy and you should never do that. What were you thinking? My goodness me. And everybody was silent. And they were looking at me and they were looking at him. And I thought, yes, I've done it. I've set the example. I didn't, however, realize why they were silent and what they were actually looking at and what they were thinking until quite a bit later. The story, the idea is that you praise in public, but you criticize or you offer constructive advice in private. And I kind of got that the wrong way around because simply nobody had ever told me different. If you think of school, where do you learn leadership? From your parents, from your church, from your school. Your teacher tells you off in public so nobody else does it again. Of course they do. But if you do that with grown-ups, oh my goodness me, it doesn't work at all. Especially not smart creatives that we all try and aspire to be and to lead. They were looking at me thinking, how could you do that to that poor man? Not, oh gosh, Paul's taught us a lesson we'll never forget. Well, I had taught them a lesson they would never forget, and half of them quit in the next 6 months. That was my
Wow. And so
attitude.
when did it come full circle for you and you had your aha moment like, oh, I really blew that?
Oh, 15 years later.
You weren't doing that for 15 years, though, were
I
you, to
wasn't I
people?
wasn't making that sort of depth of catastrophical mistake. No, it was, I think it was one of the elder statespeople, a lovely older woman who had overheard my conversation and took me to one side and said, no, don't do that. Why not? Look, we're all paying attention. No, the guy's never going to work for you. He was the first to go, actually. He quit.
Yeah.
Took like a week and he went, didn't need that.
He said, screw this. I'm out of here.
And the horse you rode in on. Yeah, gone. So I chased him out the door and he was a good guy. He was a good guy. We met again. We're still friendly-ish. But this wonderful woman took me to one side and basically said, no, don't do that. And here's why.
Mhm.
And the why is because you're scaring them off, because you're breaking trust, because you're not giving an example that they can follow. You're sharing publicly, you're humiliating publicly, you're just doing everything incorrectly. The challenge was that her feedback wasn't particularly well delivered either. So I felt really under the cosh. So,
Yeah. And so as you were going through and growing as a leader, was there a moment when you had kind of that aha where you turned the corner? Like, again, I'll go back with my teaching because it was in a leadership course in sustainability and I was teaching storytelling. And I did it for 5 years. And year one, it felt like, boy, I was just really learning as I went. And I got to say, ASU was remarkable in their patience with me and teaching me how to do this. It was about halfway through year two, I finally found my pace. I'm like, oh, I get what you're trying to teach me finally. And it significantly improved my course and my ability to do that. But it took a while. So when in your career did you finally have that aha moment like, oh, this is what leadership's all about?
well, I think I was possibly the typical disaster promotion. So I was promoted to be a manager because I was really good at my job. And they said, well, you're really good at your job. Here you go. Here's a team of people to look after.
So what was that job that you were really good at? Because I want to explore this a little bit. You were very talented in one area, and they said, oh, since you've got this talent, you must make a great manager. What was that?
I was just a project manager. I was delivering training courses to big corporates, and I was relatively well organized and reasonably good at it. So they said, we need that sort of skill set back in the office here in London because I was traveling around as a consultant. Come down to London, moved down to London as an immigrant, and look after this customer service team. So, okay, fine, I can do that. Great, I'm the boss now. Hey, it was Marco happened shortly after that. Um, Various other disasters happened in between, but it took something like 5, 6 years before I actually realized what the job was. And the minute you realize that, it's not about me, it's not about me, it's about them. And then I have to be able to convey what I want people to do in a structured, meaningful way and keep them doing it, keep them going forward without beating them over the head, without resorting to carrot and stick. Because everything you've seen about how you think people should behave comes from the people you've been around. Of course it does. It comes from your experience. And very few people have ever reflected on how this works. Very few people look internally. Because if you want to understand human nature, look first at yourself. Look in the mirror. Try and reflect upon your own actions, your own behaviors, your own biases, your own likes, dislikes, on how people treat you. And most of the stuff that you've experienced has been fairly bad. It's school. It's school. Now, you were teaching in a higher education, which is surrounded with young adults, really. But when you go back down to school, you're told what to do. You're told to sit down, shut up, and do what I'm telling you. Not an effective way of working. If you want to persuade people, you want to influence people, you want to lead people towards the sunlit uplands, you need to do it exactly as you've been talking about. You need to do it in the context that they understand, the language that they want to use, explaining what's in it for them, why they have to be doing it in a structured way that leads them as a story from point to point to point, with the underpinnings of what's called agape, which is this service to the other, this love of the other person. And the minute I discovered it was actually not fear that drives, but actually love that inspires, you operationalize love in the workplace. And it's a scary word. It's a scary word to use at work. You're just waiting for a phone call from HR. Paul, I hear you were talking about loving the people you work with. We don't do that in this organization. Actually, yes, you have to, but not the one you're thinking of. There are four. There are four different sorts. Actually, there's many different sorts. The Greeks have got great words for this. You have eros, which is erotic, romantic love with your wife. You have philia. You have storge with your friends, with your companions. But the one we're talking about is agape, which this is this selfless willing of good for the other people. Some people call it the divine love. It's where the servant leadership piece comes from, serving the other.
In your work in the L&D world in sales and marketing, were you taught or did people demonstrate to you servant leadership and this is the way it is about? Or is it something fairly new that you have brought into your own career?
I picked it up when I started to actually understand that leadership and management and how they work together are actually skills and things that you can learn and get better at in themselves, in and of themselves. That point was where I started to work and to study what it meant to be a leader and what the tools of management were that you needed to use in order to lead. Leadership is getting people to somewhere that they would not get on their own. It's the magnanimity of seeing greatness in other people and bringing it out of them. How do you do that? Here's a tool set. Here are things that you need to be able to do, very basic things, but things that you need to be able to do and do well, repeatedly well, consistently well. And
what are some of those tools?
well, we're talking about storytelling, but that's one we'll certainly get to. It's fairly straightforward things like setting people on a path. It's holding people accountable. It's giving constructive feedback. I mean, a lovely one, very, very simple thing is apparently the word feedback is thought of by many people as being the equivalent of hearing footsteps behind you in the dark. Tip, tap, as you're walking along. I've got some feedback for you, Park. Oh no, what have I done? So don't do that. Just say, I've got an observation. Would you mind if I made an observation? I've observed that this is happening. The impact of that behavior is the following. Can you help me understand what's going on? There you go. Easy. And then then you sit quietly and let whoever it is saying something say it. I've observed this. You can't argue with what I've observed. You can't. Court of law. This is what I've observed. The impact of this that you might not know about, I'm sharing the impact of your behavior or whatever it is you've done or not done. Help me understand. And then you sit quietly. Job done.
You know, it feels like to me that when you come at them with, hey, I've got feedback to them, you are now speaking down to them. And nobody, of course, likes to be spoken down to. It's a very logic, reasoned approach, and it's one that is of opinion and assertion. of my opinion, I've got feedback for you. I didn't like this, or you need to do that, or whatever. And everybody that I've come across, including myself, will argue all day long with your opinions and your assertions. But when you reframe it as an observation, it's now the retelling of a story of something that you observed, an event that happened that maybe caught you as the leader a little bit sideways or whatever. And people can't argue with that, because now you have replaced your opinion and your assertion with what you observed or what you experienced. And that's a great way to set the stage, right? And then to, like you say, set them on the path. Give them maybe they're just a little bit off that path and they've got to change just a little bit. And so, again, you're back to storytelling, because that path is a journey they're on.
Exactly. And this is where the business of leadership is the story that you are telling. It's not once upon a time there were three little executives who wanted to eat porridge. No. The story is the journey that you're taking people on from point A to point B that they would not get on their own. They are characters in the story. This is what you're trying to get across to them. This is the beauty of the idea that your goal is their greatness is to make them excel. And if you can share as part of this story that my job is to make you great, my job is to make you succeed, then your interpretation of my actions shifts. I'm no longer a micromanager trying to tell you what to do. I got some feedback, you've got to do this. I've got an observation that will help you, because that's what I want to do. I want to help.
You become the mentor guide in their world. They are the center of the story. They are the hero on this journey, and you communicate to them from their point of view, and you're there to help. And sometimes you got to be critical. Sometimes you got to come in and tear them down a little bit to build them up, but tear them down not in a bad way. You've got to highlight the errors of the word, kind of like what your mentor did to you when you were speaking to Marco and you called him out in front of everyone. Then they pull you aside and say, "We love the work you're doing here. We know you have a big heart, Paul, but that's not the way that you go about coaching someone up."
I'm going to pick up on exactly the structure of what you just did there, Park. That is called, I'm not going to swear on your show because I don't do that. It's called the poop sandwich. Okay. Here's something nice. Here's the nasty bit in the middle of the bread. Here's something nice. The challenge with that methodology is if you hear the something nice and then you're just waiting for the shoe to drop. You've said, "Hey, Park, great job." Okay, what's the but? I'm waiting for the but. I didn't hear the nice thing. I'm just waiting for the... So the challenge with that is you've got to just strip off the bread and get straight to the meat. You get straight to the meat by saying, "This is my observation." That's the impact, which you didn't know about. So you're not necessarily tearing them down. You are exposing, you are highlighting, you're bringing to their attention something they may not have recognized. 90% of coaching is awareness. It's when I bring something to somebody's attention, the response is usually, "Oh, I did not know." And then the other 10% is when it's an interpersonal thing. The result of the coaching session is typically, "Have you spoken to them?" "No." "Go and speak to them." "Oh." I don't want to put coaches or coaching down, but realistically, if you as a leader or a manager can pick up those two things, you're done.
You know, it's interesting you talk about the poop sandwich, the shit sandwich. That's okay. We can call it what it is right here. We have this framework that you don't know about. I didn't share with you before. This called the and, but, therefore. This and this, but this, therefore this. Now, people, a lot of my listeners, longtime listeners, are going to say, "Hey, Park, he just shat on your ABT." Well, Paul makes a very good point here. The ABT for us works, especially when you are trying to get people out of status quo thinking in sales, in marketing, and that kind of thing. It's a whole different animal when you are doing leadership coaching. Just like Paul had pointed out, what you don't want to use the ABT for is, "Hey, Paul, you're doing a great job here, and everybody seems to love you, but you really blew it when you did that with Marco. Therefore, here's what we should do next, because to Paul's point, you have just negated all the positive stuff before that. So you have now, by the way, that approach works really, really, really well in sales. But therefore set up, you identify your audience, what do they want relative to your offering, and why is that important to them? But they don't currently have it because of this major problem. Therefore, here's how you are uniquely equipped to help them get it. ABT works marvelously in that.
Beautiful.
Not so much in leadership. You've got a template called S.O.A.R, S-O-A-R. Can you walk us through that? Because it is really a story structure that you use in leadership development.
It is. It's a great story. I mean, I'm sure you come across people who say, "Oh, Park, I just can't tell stories. I'm not a storyteller." My wife does like that. She said her typical response when I start talking about something is, "Get to the point." She's an engineer.
And you're a Scot, so you're known for storytelling.
Oh my goodness! When my mother comes down from Scotland, number one, my accent gets awfully broad. I tell you, it gets really. When the pair of us are actually chatting away, and my poor wife Catherine is there in the middle going, "Well, whenever you just make a point, please." So for people who are either not great natural storytellers or think they're not, there's a lovely little framework, and it's really useful if you just want to try and get a point across. It's really, really useful if you're in a job interview, or you're trying to do can you give me an example of a time when you did something? Well, this is the framework you got to use. SOAR. And that's what it is. Your stories will soar, right? So what's the situation you find yourself in? Well, I find myself faced with a situation where I had an obstacle that was the brick wall ahead of me that I couldn't scale. And then the actions that I did to get over that was I found a ladder and a hammer, and I climbed as high as I could and knocked as many bricks down. And then the result of that was that I had a few bricks left over. I could build my own house, but I did manage to get to the other side. So the situation, the obstacles, the actions, and the result, these 4 simple steps, tells you where you started from, why you couldn't proceed, what you did to overcome them, and what the results were. Now, as a result being, ideally, it's a number. I gained 10 new bricks, or I learned something. I learned how to build a wall.
Can you give us an example of that in your own life?
Oh my goodness. Well, the situation was that I had a promotion that I'd been chasing for a long time, and the obstacle was that the guy who was in the job was still there for a very long time, but he eventually overcame it. My actions in this case were that before it was confirmed, I started telling everybody I had got the job. And my boss, the result was that I embarrassed the heck out of him. I embarrassed him because he hadn't confirmed it with the board. He hadn't confirmed it with people around him. And I embarrassed him, and I lost a lot of credibility in his eyes. I broke his trust, and he took me to one side. And the other result, the learning result from this, was that he taught me how to give really good feedback. This observation framework was exactly what he did. So I'm giving you a two-parter here, the twofer, which was the SOAR. And then he said, Paul, over and over a very nice dinner. So the situation, the idea here is that depending on the nature of the feedback, it's a phone call, a text message, or you go to the right place in the right time, in the right situation. And he sat me down over a lovely, I remember what we ate, where it was. I remember the weather. Oh, and he sat me down and he said, Paul, what you did when you told everybody that you had the role, there's a leadership role, before it was actually confirmed by the board, embarrassed me, embarrassed the board, and you forced people's hand because we couldn't take it back, and we would have taken it back if we could have, because you embarrassed us that badly. Okay, so that was what happened, the observation and the impact. Can you help me understand what was going on? And I had no words. What was going on reflection? It was my ego and my impatience and my immaturity that was just going, finally, this guy's gone. It's mine. And all it would have taken was 48 hours, 72 hours of patience. And it would have been on good terms, but it took me nearly a year to rebuild the political capital, Thankfully, my boss, wonderful, wonderful man called Jacques, he was one of the two phenomenal managers that I had. Thankfully, he was very good and said, and now we understand each other. It's forgotten. And it was, as far as he was concerned, not the rest of the organization, but as far as he was concerned, it was. And he took a lot of the blame for me. So there you go. That's a twofer. The S.O.A.R story, as well as how you do really, really good feedback.
So you were able to rebuild that trust with him through it. And I love that saying of, trust grows like a pine tree, but can fall like a pine cone if you're not careful. It's one little thing you can do, and your trust goes right out the window, and then you've got to take a lot of time to rebuild that trust.
There's nothing as easy to lose as a good reputation.
Yeah. How do you, when you were using S.O.A.R and you were coaching and training your customers, and they're in sales and marketing and general leadership, right? How do you, and you shared a really interesting story right now with us, and I'm sitting here saying, okay, it's somewhat general. I'd love just like a little bit more specifics, a timestamp. When did it happen? The location, what kind of restaurant, just some little tiny specifics that really fire up the theater of my mind.
Yeah.
How do you do that without going on and on so you don't have people like your wife saying, Paul, get to the point?
Yeah. So this is the trick about the situation, okay? So the situation, for each of the elements there, you want to pull out one detail and only one detail. So the situation is, it was a rainy Saturday, okay? So it was a rainy Saturday. And what you're thinking of, it was a rainy Saturday evening. It was a rainy Saturday evening in Paris. So it was a rainy Saturday evening in Paris, and I was having dinner with my boss. And what he said, the challenge we have here, the obstacle in front of us, what's the one detail about that obstacle? It's not just the generic thing. So the challenge was that that you're trying to pull out either an environmental, a visual clue. So it's a rainy Saturday evening in Paris, and I was having dinner with my boss, and he needed to talk to me about my promotion that I nearly didn't get. So I nearly didn't get the promotion. So now you're waiting for the next piece. He wanted to talk to me about the promotion that I nearly didn't get. So why didn't I nearly get it? Well, I'd embarrassed him by announcing it beforehand. No. I embarrassed him by announcing it on LinkedIn and on the company messaging system to hundreds of people beforehand. So the details so far, rainy Saturday evening, had dinner with my boss. The obstacle, the idea of what was the action that I took? I embarrassed them by doing this, like that. And the result was that they nearly took the job back from me. And I almost got fired. So you've got those just touches of detail as you're going through. And that opens it up from being a job framework, an interview framework, into being a storytelling framework. So you can use it quite straightforwardly and quite clinically as, give me a time when you had to work in a team. Well, I had to work in a team where there was 5 of us, and we needed to write a report, but it was too hard, and we needed things, and we did it, and da-da-da-dum. So you've got that's fine. But if you want to actually, as you said, the wonderful phrase you used there, engage the theater of my mind, I'm going to write that down. It's lovely. I want to engage the theater of your mind by picking out just a cogent detail, a visual or an auditory or the scent of aspidistra was in the air. Something that actually just pulls out one stage at each of the elements where you can. So it's adding that to the framework, I think, opens it up.
Yeah, and I love the idea of the theater of the mind. Paul, early in my career as a copywriter in the ad world, I was a radio producer and would write and direct radio spots and just had so much fun. And I would use crazy, crazy stories. And it was even before I'd study story. It just came out of me intuitively. And I learned from a lot of the greats out there. And it was so much fun that, to me, it was whenever you could, in that radio commercial, light up the theater of the mind of that listener who may be stuck in traffic at 5 p.m. on their way home. They're really annoyed. They just want to get home, have that first beer or glass of wine or whatever, and they're just hearing this blah, 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 that if you could tell a story to get them to really picture it and feel it and laugh or cry or whatever it is, then you become immensely memorable. And it's not someone now just listening to a story, but they're experiencing a story. And of course, that works extraordinarily well in one-on-one interpersonal communications. You do the exact same thing. Picture yourself as a radio commercial coming at that person if you've got to share that story, but get them to light up the theater of the mind so that they can feel it, they can experience it, they become a part of it, and you become indelibly stamped upon them.
Yeah. Yeah, so much, so much. I mean, the original storyteller, the original servant leader, where it came through parables. You know, you had the parable of the talents, you have the parable of the good Samaritans. These were the very, very bland if you read them quickly. But you study any of the parables from the Sermon on the Mount or any of these things, you put any effort into this, and there is invariably one or two little moments that just humanizes what's going on, that brings out the depth that you would otherwise skip over from Sunday school. So I think that's these are lovely things. He's the original servant leader.
You know, a thought just popped to me. I write these aphorisms for the business of story, and I got over 100 of them, all about storytelling in weird ways. You know, it shows up in business, and you just created one in my mind here that stories are cerebral tattoos, that people will forget your data, your charts, your graphs, your logic and reason. It'll just bounce off of them. But when you tell a story, it becomes indelibly stamped or a tattoo on their mind, on their memory, on their learning, you know, on what do I do next, because they can picture it.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And when you touch on learning there, and I think there's no better way of learning anything than through storytelling. And what I've been spending quite a bit of time doing is trying to get people to understand that this journey of leadership and the tools of management, what they are, how you apply them, and doing that through storytelling, or rather through metaphor. So I like my garden. I use my garden quite a lot. You know, you plant seeds, you have to wait for them to grow, you can harvest. There's all these different ways of pulling people's attention. Sailing's another nice one. You know where you are today. You're in the safe harbor, but a ship in the harbor isn't any use. You've got to get out to sea. You have to chart your journey. You have to use the binnacle to compass the directions. Get the team to raise the sails. All these different ways of engaging people's attention, essentially, and memory. Because we live with stories. We are an oral civilization. It's just the way that people remember things. And if they find themselves in a similar situation, it's, oh yeah, I suppose I do have to chart a course forward. Yeah, he was right.
Mm-hmm.
That works.
Well, what do you do when you get a customer, client, or whatever that pushes back on storytelling? And I ask this because people ask me a lot, how do you sell storytelling? And I say, I don't sell storytelling. The people that come to work, want to work with me have already bought into the concept of we need to become better storytellers. We know stories work. We just don't know how to do it. And so then I'm brought in, and of course, quite often we'll be working with a large group. And within that large group, it will be mandatory that they are attending, and I will have probably a third of the room that are saying, oh God, I'm wasting my time on this storytelling stuff. How do you overcome that in your business world, especially in the B2B side, when people feel like there's no room in my life in the business world for storytelling? People buy with logic, reason, charts, graphs, and data.
Number one, and I know that they are completely wrong. People do not buy like that. People are not rational. So I think the first thing I do is I let them believe that as long as they want to believe it. And when I'm presenting each of the sessions, for example, I talk about let's say you're talking about setting objectives. So companies with clear objectives typically have a 40% higher XYZ because of study Z, whatever it is. So there's lots of studies out there. And the one thing you need to do is to be super clear, because what happens in vagueness stays in vagueness, baby. So you make a joke, give them some data points, then you move. As part of this journey, I build up the whole idea that people are not rational, they are rationalizing. You make a decision, you say something, and then you try and find some way of justifying it. And how do you justify it? With data. in the shape of a story. I bought the new car, honey. Oh, why? Well, the NCAP ratings were 5-star and the fuel efficiency, it was red, and I've always wanted a red one because they're faster. So you admit that they will get there in the end. They might not get there when they're sitting in front of you, but I think anybody who's honest enough to be a good salesperson recognize. In fact, quite frankly, if you're selling and you really think people make decisions based on facts, what are you smoking? And can I have some? It's not a thing. So you recognize that you have to give them both. They will make a decision based on an irrational feeling, sentiment, whatever, and then they will justify that decision, typically to their boss or their partner, based on a piece of data. So you give them both.
You just gave me a gift.
You're welcome.
So you were commenting on my comment about engaging the theater of the mind and how you might borrow that. I'm going to borrow, maybe steal, what happens in vagueness stays in vagueness. I love that. That is such a great, great line. Where did you come up with that?
You got to do it with the Elvis voice. Right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, baby. It was.
Now that sounds like Sean Connery, actually, right there.
Sean Connery sounds like Sean Connery can sound like the Russian. Today I'm a Russian pilot. Tomorrow I'm an Afghanistani person, and today I'm from Scotland. And you all sound the same. Anyway, no, it's the only accent I can do. I'm sorry. I came up with it when I was putting the course together. Quite frankly, I was looking for ways of making myself amused, because if you deliver the same thing quite a lot, it's got to keep yourself. You got to keep yourself entertained, right?
Yeah.
So it was just part of the journey, part of the course.
I love it. That's a terrific line.
I'll send you this.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Vagueness. I can't even say it right because the other one's so ingrained. But this has been really fascinating. I appreciate your time here, Paul. Where can people learn more? And I think you've got a giveaway for them or something that they can use to start your process immediately.
Absolutely. I am absolutely delighted to share a pretty useful chapter from the book of the course. So this course has been going for a while. I decided to write a book about it. The book's called The Hidden Tradecraft of Elite Managers, and it's going to be out in e-format in November. In the meantime, the chapter 5 Steps to Improve Your One-to-Ones is available on the website. And what we're going to give just for your listeners here, Park, if anybody wants to come and book a pilot cohort with me on the Practical Leadership Playbook, we'll give your listeners 2 free seats when they book something, and that's about $1,000 worth of joy and happiness. So they can find me on the Practical Leadership Academy website, which is practical-leadership.academy.
And we'll have all that in the show notes, a link to that. And when they go there, how do you know they're coming from our show, or how do they pick up that freebie?
Well, I'll make sure that there's the link to that you have in the show notes here has a special little code.
That's perfect. Your book, Hidden Tradecraft of Elite Managers, you have a subtitle on there that I wanted to ask you about. Unveiling Second Nature Skills for Remarkable Performance. What do you mean by second nature skills, and how do you identify and reveal them?
Well, the idea of a second nature skill comes from the tradecraft concept, and the whole thing comes from me watching a bricklayer at work in my garden. And the bricklayer was 70 if he was a day. His team were there. It was 2 kids, right? The kids were 35 or something, and they would put the pegs out and they would build the brick stuff. But when he came to build the beautiful curve around the edge, no tools, no nothing, just him. And it was like watching a chain-smoking, overweight ballerina. He was amazing. Slip, slap, clap, slip, slap, clap, slip, slap, clap, just brick after brick. And he'd been doing it for 50 years. That sort of ingrained second nature skill is the sort of tradecraft that we need to aspire to, especially as managers. And it's not hard to get there because they're so basic. That's the things I'm talking about. And unveiling them one at a time.
It's a basic talent, or a unique talent someone has. So maybe you're working with a team of 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 people. You, as that leader or manager, need to help them identify, and you observe and recognize what these second nature talents are. And then I guess really build on them, build on those strengths.
Building on the strengths, I think, is a core part of the course in the book. And the idea that if you get people who are good at something to become excellent at it, you change the game. If you get somebody who is pretty average at something to become less average, but not quite so bad at it, you're not going to change the world. You want me to become an accountant? I can read financial statements, no problem, but I'm not going to be an accountant anytime. You want me to become an expert at, let's say, I don't know, public speaking, something like that. That will really help me change the game. I can go from a 7 to a 10 out of 10, but I can't go from a 3 to a 10. I can go from like a 3 to a 5, maybe. Making that stretch, it's not so useful. Focus on the strengths, you're changing your world.
And how do you, as a leader or manager, recognize those talents?
That starts with going all the way back to the very beginning, which is it's not about you, it's all about them. And actually knowing the people you're working with, spending the time with them and listening to their stories, finding out what's important for them. My magic question is, what else? That's it. What else? You have a chat with somebody, whatever it is, and then right at the end, you just say, what else? And then you sit quietly and just let them talk. What else? Find out what's important to them. And if you know what's important to them and you know them, and it doesn't happen overnight, and you know them as an individual, you'll be able to understand their strengths. You'll be able to understand what motivates them. Somebody's always wanted to be a space pilot, giraffe wrangler, whatever it is they want to be. How can you help them? How can you go out of your way to make that happen for them? And you lean into somebody's strengths, miracles happen every time. Every time.
Well, like you said, it did come full circle with that because you started with you have to focus on your audience, your people, place them at the center of the story, and you play the vastly important role of mentor or guide in their journey.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah.
It's not about you. It's all about them.
Isn't that the funny thing? In my training, I do a lot of work with chief marketing officers, and these are some very seasoned people. And more times than not, when I really underscore the fact that your stories are always about your customers and not about yourself, there's an aha moment that goes on. And I would think by that time that they would know that, and your stories are not about what you make, but what you make happen in people's lives, right? What's in it for them. And the same is true with any leadership engagement. When you're working with people, what's in it for them?
And it's beyond the second stage. Most people can't think beyond first stage. Most people will think that it's the old story. You know the story about Black and Decker, right? Black and Decker doesn't sell drills; they sell holes. No, they don't. Oh, okay. What did they sell? Well, what happens with a hole? Well, I put a picture up or a shelf. Okay, so they get a shelf. I'm selling shelves. Nearly. Why do they want a shelf up? Because they want to put something on it. What do they want to put on it? They want to put a picture of their family in a nice room where they can live happily ever after. So Black and Decker drills are actually building a beautiful home for people to have warmth and love. And so it's not what happens with what you've done, it's what happens way after you've done your job well. You're selling afters. You're selling the after effect. So when you talk to that, and that's a sales thing as well. That's why I love sales. Sales is it's a microcosm of existence. It's how everything happens. It's all communication wrapped up into one neat package. So when you sell, what happens way after what you've done is complete, that's where you grab people and you start to hear them using their language. They start to go, I get you.
And that's a part of the steps that you outlined early on is show them the way, show them the path. Here's where we're going. Here's how you can help us get there. Here's what it's going to look like when we get there to get them to buy into that look and feel of how we're going to change for tomorrow and so forth. And then their role, their participation, their active member of the story to help you get there and help the team get there and help themselves to get there.
You want to make somebody happy? Hold them accountable. You want to make somebody enjoy their work? Have them be successful. Hold them accountable. Hold their feet to the fire in a good way. Make them successful. If they're successful, they'll be happy. Giving somebody constructive, difficult feedback, holding them to account, making sure they're on track is difficult. It's an awkward thing to do, but it's just one of the tools that you need to manage people in order you can lead them to the bright sunlit uplands that will make them happy, make them have a good life, and make you all, successful and live happily ever after.
Well, Paul, you've led me to the bright, sunlit highlands here today with this interview. Absolutely fantastic. I love speaking with the Brits, the Scots, and the Irish because you all are so doggone good storytellers. Thank you for that.
Park, it's been an absolute pleasure and honor speaking to you today. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to and sharing this edition of The Business of Story. Could you also do me a huge favor? If you haven't already, would you mind jumping over to iTunes and the Business of Story page and leaving us a rating and review? It certainly helps us get found in the myriad of podcasts and the cacophony of communication out there, and I really, really, really appreciate it. If I can help you and your people grow, and I know I can, as confident and compelling storytellers, then please shoot me a note to park@businessofstory.com. I provide in-person, virtual training, a hybrid of those. I've got an online micro training course called the ABTs of Storytelling that you can take right now. And I'm here for your people to make sure that they apply the craft and the sensibilities of storytelling to make all of their business, make their career, make your brand as important in the hearts and minds of your customers as possible. So give me a shout, park@businessofstory.com, or go ahead and take the ABTs of Storytelling at businessofstory.com/ABT. Hey, a big thank you to Caden Howell for editing our show, Marissa Hill for marketing and community development, and of course for Darius Hill, who has composed our amazing music. Please join me next Monday when Harvard's David Edelman will be here to talk about how you can use artificial intelligence to personalize your brand and business storytelling for greater engagement with and profit from your customers. So you're not going to want to miss that. And until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one epic. Thanks so much for listening.